At the end of the 10th century, the migration of the Oghuz began from the territory of Kazakhstan to the southwest to Iran. In 1040, the Oghuz leader named Seljuk created a new state of the Great Seljuks, with its capital in the city of Khorasan in Iran. In 1055, the Seljuk Sultan Togrul captured Baghdad. In 1071, at the Battle of Manzikert in Asia Minor, the Seljuks defeated the army of the Byzantine Emperor Diogenes. In 1090, Sultan Melik Shah created a huge empire in the west of the Red and Mediterranean Sea, in the north from the Aral Sea to the Indian Ocean in the south. In 1092, Sultan Melik Shah died. The empire began to disintegrate. In 1195, the empire fell apart. In 1075, the great-grandson of Seljuk, Suleiman, united the nomadic Oghuz Turks. In the 11th century, a massive migration of the Oghuz people from Central Asia to Asia Minor, numbering up to 1 million people, began. Suleiman created a new state in Asia Minor, with its capital in the city of Iznik, Nicaea. In 1092, his son Kılıç Arslan I became the Sultan. In 1096, the invasion of the Crusaders into Asia Minor began. In 1097, in the Battle of Eskişehir, the Seljuks were defeated by the Crusaders. But then, in 1100 and 1101, the Seljuks defeated 3 armies of the Crusaders at Malatya, Amasya, Eregli. In 1147, the Second Crusade began with 2 armies, the German, commanded by Emperor Conrad, and the French, led by King Louis VII. The size of the army reached up to 1 million people. These troops were destroyed by Sultan Mesud I. The losses of the Crusaders turned out to be colossal and irreparable. The Turks saved the Muslim civilization. In 1176, the Seljuks defeated the Byzantines and expanded the territory of the state. In 1318, Sultan Kılıç Arslan V died. Thus, the Seljuk dynasty, victorious crusaders, ended. In the 13th century, the Oghuz clan Kai, led by Ertugrul, migrated from the territory of South Kazakhstan to Asia Minor. Ertugrul entered the service of the Seljuk Sultan. His son Osman, who gave the name to the Turkic nation, began to unite the Oghuz into a single state. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II captured Constantinople, renaming it Istanbul, laying the foundation for the Ottoman Empire. In subsequent centuries, the Ottoman Empire expanded in Asia, Europe, Africa, reaching enormous proportions during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. The Ottoman Empire lasted until 1920. Kimaks lived in the middle reaches of the Irtysh. After the collapse of the Uyghur Khaganate in 840, the Kimaks began to migrate westward. The Kipchak tribes were part of the Kimaks. The Kimak state consisted of 7 tribes. There were 16 fortress cities in the state, located along the banks of rivers and lakes. The supreme ruler had the title Kagan. The spiritual worldview of the Kimaks was Tengrianism, the cult of the sky. Kimaks had a Turkic runic writing. The Kimak state was a strong state. In 916, the new state of Liao was created in Central Asia. Because of this, the movement of the Turkic tribes of Kai and Kuns to the west began. increasing pressure on the Kimaks. By the end of the 10th century, the Kimak state began to disintegrate. After the disintegration of the Kimak Kaganate, the migration of the Kipchak tribes began to the southwest of Kazakhstan and into the west of the southern Russian steppes. The Kipchaks pushed the Oghuz back to the west. At the end of the 12th century, the Kipchaks played an important role in the political life of the Khwarezmshah state, serving as mercenaries until 1220. In 1055, the Kipchaks reached Kiev Rus. Some of the Kipchaks who roamed the northern Caucasus, led by Khan Artik in 1118, at the invitation of the Georgian king David the Builder, moved to Georgia to protect Georgia from the Seljuk Turks. The number of Kipchaks resettled was 40,000 people. The Kipchaks inhabited a vast territory from the Irtysh in the east to the southern Russian steppes. In Eastern sources, this territory was called Desht-i-Kipchak, the country of the Kipchaks. Relations between Kiev Rus and the Kipchaks, the Russian called them Polovtsi, were complex. In 1061, Khan Iskal defeated the troops of Prince Vsevolod. In 1095, the war between Kievan Rus and the Kipchaks began. In 1116, the war ended. A period of peaceful relations between Russia and the Kipchaks began. The Kipchak Khans entered into family relations with Russian princes and married their daughters to them. In the ancient Russian literary monument of the 12th century, the word of Igor's regiment, these relations are shown. Kipchak Khans participated in the political life of Kiev Rus. In 1237, the Kipchaks were defeated by Khan Batu. Some of them submitted to Batu. Some of them, led by Khan Hotian, went to Hungary. To the north of the Great Wall of China was the Great Steppe, or Great Tatari, where Turkic and mixed Turkic Tungus tribes, who were called Tatars, lived. Temujin, later Genghis Khan, the greatest conqueror in the history of mankind, from the Kiat clan, began to forcefully unite the nomads, Tatars, Merkits, Jalayir, into a single state. In 1203, Temujin defeated the Kirat Turks, and in 1204, defeated the strong Khanate of the Naiman Turks and united the steppe. In 1206, at the Kurultai, nomadic families raised Temujin on a white felt mat, electing him as a Khan. He was given a new name, Genghis Khan. The spiritual worldview of the nomads was Tengrianism, the cult of the eternal sky of Tengri. The code of ancient civil laws of Yasa, adopted by Genghis Khan, repeated the ancient codes of the Turks of the 6th and 7th centuries. Genghis Khan created the decimal system of the army, which was preserved to the present day. The Uyghur, or Old Naiman alphabet, was adopted as the state script. In 1211, a war broke out against northern China. In 1215, Beijing was captured, and a peace treaty was eventually signed. In 1220, the Khwarezmshah Empire was defeated. In 1220, Genghis Khan led a campaign to Iran and reached North India. In 1227, Genghis Khan died, leaving the empire to 4 sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Agade, and Tuli. The Turkic language was the state language of Genghis Khan's empire. The written sources of the 13th century, the seal of Guyuk Khan, 1246, the edification of Khubilai Khan, 1276, and the Paizi of the Great Khans were written in the Turkic language. In 1220 to 1221, Chinese diplomats were at Genghis Khan's headquarters. They noted that the Tatars bury the dead in the ground, digging a hole with lateral branch where the dead were laid, just like the Turks. The Mongols did not bury the dead in the land, but left them in the steppe. There are no written sources and archaeological burials about the Mongols before the 13th century. On the territory of modern Mongolia, only Turkic burials have been found. In the Chinese, European, and Russian chronicles, only Tatars are mentioned, and there is no mention of the Mongols. According to the Kazakh researcher Maral Tompiev, the Chinese called the nomads Mengu, who lived north of the Great Wall of China, means dark, ignorant in Chinese. The term Mongol, Mogul, began to spread after the conquest of China by Khubilai Khan at the end of the 13th century. The Uyghurs who traded in the Great Steppe called nomads as Mongols, Moguls. It was not a national, but a political term. Historians mistakenly call the Turks Mongols in the 13th century. According to Tompiev, the term Eke Ulus means Ake Ulus, or paternal Ulus. The famous Persian historian Rashid al-Din, in the primary source Collection of Chronicles, published in 1310 by the edition of the Chenghizid Persian Ilkhans, Ghazan Khan, Ojatu Khan, Emir Polad Chisan, a representative of Khubilai Khan from China, writes about the history of the empire of Genghis Khan and the origin of the clan that all nomadic clans of the empire of Genghis Khan are Turks, called Moguls, Mughals. The same Naimans, Kires, Jalayir, Tatars began to call themselves Mongols out of pride in the great victories they had won. These included the Tungus-speaking peoples, like the Oirats, who were part of the empire of Genghis Khan. Rashid al-Din emphasizes that the Mongolian clans of the Niruna and Darlekin are branches of the Turkic people. Modern Mongols as a people formed later, in the 14th to 16th centuries. In 1368, the Yuan Empire of the Chingizids in China collapsed. The Tatars returned to their homeland in Mongolia. The language and culture of the Tatars was influenced by the 50-year stay in China, as well as the adoption of the new religion of Tibetan Buddhism. The conquest of Mongolia by the Tungus Manchus in the 17th century and their 200-year rule also influenced the language and culture of the Mongols. After the 15th century, the Turkic Tatars in Mongolia were assimilated by the Tungus Manchus and lost their Turkic language. In 1259, the great Khan Mengu died. A struggle for power began between his brothers Khubilai and Arek Buga. Khubilai won. In 1264, he became a great Khan. Khubilai moved the capital from Karakorum to Beijing, China. In 1273, Khubilai launched a war against the ruling Song dynasty of southern China. In 1279, Khubilai conquered all of China. Turks Tatars united China into a single state. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo, who lived at the court of Khubilai Khan in the 13th century, wrote that Khubilai Khan corresponded in the Turkic language. In 1280, Khubilai founded the new Yuan dynasty. Khubilai conquered Vietnam, Cambodia, Burma, Manchuria, Korea, Tibet. In 1274, Khubilai founded a navy and began an invasion of Japan, but a sea storm scattered the ships, and the campaign ended in failure. In 1293, Khubilai sent a navy to conquer the island of Java to create a seaport for trade in the Indian Ocean, but the expedition failed. During the rule of Khubilai, a huge empire and a powerful state apparatus were created. In 1294, Khubilai Khan died. In 1368, the Chinese people revolted and overthrew the last emperor, Togon Temür, who fled to Mongolia with the remaining troops. In 1252, the great Khan Mengu decided to start a military campaign to Iran. Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu, led the campaign. One of the goals of the campaign was the conquest of the Baghdad Caliphate and Egypt. In 1258, Hulagu, together with the troops of the Golden Horde Khan, captured Baghdad, destroyed the 500-year-old Abbasid dynasty, and seized the treasures of the Baghdad caliphs. Attempts to capture Syria and Palestine were unsuccessful due to defeat from the Egyptian Mamluk Turks in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut. Hulagu created a new state, including northwestern Iran and Azerbaijan, with the capital in the city of Tabriz. In 1340, Hulagu state collapsed. After his death, Genghis Khan bequeathed to his eldest son, Jochi, lands west of the Irtysh River. At the Kurultai in Karakorum in 1229, the Mongols decided to conquer South China, Korea, and Western lands. Batu, the son of Jochi, led the campaign. In 1236, the Volga, Bulgaria, was conquered, and an offensive began on the Black Sea steppes, the lands of the Kipchak Turks and Russian principalities. The Russian cities of Ryazan and Chernigov were captured. In 1240, Kiev was taken. The Kipchaks were defeated, some of them surrendered, and the other part went with Khan Khotian to Hungary. In 1241, Batu began a campaign to Hungary. Batu captured Hungary, invaded Bohemia, close to the Adriatic Sea,